Hey everybody. So I wanted to take this opportunity to give you all a brief history of the conflict currently going on between Ukraine and Russia. Anyone who takes my class knows that sometimes I'm not very brief, but I'm going to do my best to keep it simple and to go through what I think are the major talking points so that when you guys tune into the news or talking to friends and family, you're as informed as you could possibly be about the history of what's going on here. So let's get right into it. First, I gave you guys a map. If you notice, this map is all red because it represents the former Soviet Union. So if you're going to be knowledgeable about what's going on, you have to kind of understand what the Soviet was and what it consisted of. So this is a map of the former Soviet Union. I'm not going to go country by country, but you can kind of see it here. Here's another map where it gives you a couple of more countries and their names and their locations that the last map didn't. So again, this is the Soviet Union. This is going to come into existence after the Bolshevik Revolution in 1918. Okay, the first really big talking point here in terms of a historical perspective is 1941, and it's Operation Barbarossa. So Operation Barbarossa is when Nazi Germany kind of went against an alliance that it had with the Soviet Union, and they attacked them in 1941. As you can see on this map right here, the Nazi invasion was split into three different parts. One part went up north towards the Baltic states and Leningrad. The middle army went towards Moscow, and then the southern army went towards Ukraine. And took on the Russian forces there. The Battle of Kiev, I know that's a different spelling than what it's spelled currently. Kiev is the Russian spelling of it, and since it was part of the Soviet Union back then, it was the Battle of Kiev with that spelling. It was a super brutal part of World War II. Definitely not the most brutal in the kind of Eastern War, the war between the Nazis and the Soviets, but 650,000 Soviet troops are going to be taken by the Nazis as prisoners of war. The Germans would ultimately take the city of Kiev by, mid to late 1941. Eventually, the Russian military, the Soviet military, is going to fight back and kick the Nazis out. But it was a pretty decisive part of the Second World War. And later on down the line, Ukraine is going to get, and Kiev itself is going to get like an honor of like a city of great heroism in the Second World War under the Soviet Union. Moving on to 1945, we've got something called the Yalta Conference. If you take IB history, this is a big part of year two and a big part of the originations of the Cold War conflict that hopefully most of you know about. So the Yalta Conference, Yalta is coincidentally, plays no part in this, but a part of the Crimean Peninsula, which is, can be debated, but it's Ukrainian. The big three are known as Winston Churchill. We've got this dude right here is Winston Churchill. We've got Joseph Stalin here to the right, and then we've got the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. The big three talked about a lot of stuff at the Yalta Conference. Some of it went really well. Some of it did not go so well. But one of the things that's relevant to this conversation is that they agreed that Stalin would be able to keep Eastern Europe as a Soviet sphere of influence, and then even more than just a sphere of influence, keep a couple of territories inside of the Soviet Union, reassimilate them underneath the Soviet flag. All right, Ukraine would be one of those territories that were agreed on by the big three that would be the Soviet Union. All right. Stalin would use the then Ukrainian party leader, Nikita Khrushchev, to really unify all of the ethnic Ukraines back under that Russian flag, right? In World War II, some of the Ukrainians kind of welcomed the Nazis because they felt like the Nazis were liberating them from Soviet rule. Others were very pro-Soviet and wanted to remain a part of Russia. So Nikita Khrushchev had to unify all of the ethnic Ukrainians to fold back into the Soviet Union after the war was over. A lot of Ukrainian nationalists, people that did not want to be a part of the Russian, the Soviet flag, would kind of fight small battles in the Ukraine against the Soviet forces all the way into the mid-early 1950s. All right. The next step on our journey here is 1954, and it has to do with the Crimean Peninsula that we just talked about, where the Yalta Conference was actually held. So here is a kind of map of Crimea, all right, and this is where it is in kind of the greater scope of the world. It's right on the Black Sea. It's a super strategic location because of where it is and the kind of ports that it has, both naval and commercial. All right. During World War II, Stalin did some not so good things to Crimea, both to kick the Nazis out and then to the people of Crimea itself. This is, Khrushchev did not really like what Stalin did here. So after Stalin dies in the early 1950s, Nikita Khrushchev is actually going to become the new head of the Soviet Union as a symbol, as a gesture of kind of peace to the region of the Ukraine. Khrushchev is going to award Ukraine control over the Crimean Peninsula. Now, at the time, this was not very controversial because it's all the Soviet Union, right? It's still led by Nikita Khrushchev. He just said that this is Ukrainian territory, all right? That's going to be super important moving forward. 1991, we're going to talk about good old Gorbachev now, all right? So Mikhail Gorbachev is going to be the leader of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s and early 1990s. There's a lot that goes into this. I know I'm oversimplifying it, but he realizes that the Soviet Union is losing the Cold War and probably can't win the Cold War against the economic power of the United States. So by 1991, he's going to have two huge ideas put in motion in the Soviet Union that kind of loosen the control that he has over the entire Soviet Union. Those two ideas are glasnost and perestroika. They are economic and political loosening. That's pretty much what they turn out to be, what they translate to. This would lead to massive rejections of Soviet communism all over the Eastern Bloc, all over the Eastern world, on the eastern side of the Iron Curtain, right? If you know anything about the Cold War, hopefully that terminology makes sense to you. But a lot of these former Soviet nations are going to declare independence, and they are going to move away from the Russian influence, right? The Soviet influence. Ukraine and Russia are both going to have independent elections following the kind of the ideas, the theories of Gorbachev. Boris Yeltsin is going to become the new president of Russia, and then Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia are all going to formally dissolve the former Soviet Union. All right, so Gorbachev is going to be out, but he's probably the largest reason why the Soviet Union dissolves itself in 1991. Also in 1991, we've got a pretty big part of this current conflict, and it has to do with NATO. All right. So NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it was created in 1949. NATO is still to this day the largest defensive military alliance in world history. It was created, it was actually adapted from something called the Brussels Treaty Organization, which was exclusively European nations looking to protect themselves from Soviet expansion after the Second World War, or really any type of aggression after the Second World War. By 49, they realized that they were not strong enough. They didn't have an atomic bomb. These European nations didn't have atomic technology. So they were afraid of the Soviet threat, so they looked to include the United States and Canada, and that's how the Brussels Treaty Organization became NATO in 1949. As the Soviets were crumbling, as the Soviet Union was crumbling, the Russians, the proper Russians, right, are worried about their borders and protecting their own country, right? If you know 20th century history, Russia had been invaded by a Western European country in both world wars. Russia is so vast, it's very hard to protect its borders. So to kind of ease the nerves of Russia as the Soviet Union is dissolving, NATO issues a promise, and it's not another step, not another inch east. That the NATO countries say that they won't threaten Russian security by including former Soviet states into NATO, right? That has since been broken, all right, by as early as 1999. A lot of these former Soviet countries are going to be incorporated into NATO. The biggest ones being, Poland, all right, that's by far the biggest former Soviet country that is now in NATO, but also very kind of important to the situation and the idea of Russian security are these states right here. These are known as the Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Those are now in NATO. The Czech Republic, Croatia, Albania, Slovakia. These are all former Soviet countries, former countries east of the Iron Curtain that are now incorporated into NATO. 2014, we've got a Ukrainian uprising and we've got the annexation of Crimea. All right. So essentially what happens is that the Ukrainians have a popular uprising. Their president was a pro-Russian president, and that's not what the people wanted for their country. So they're going to go through a political upheaval, and they are going to remove this pro-Russian president, which creates a lot of political chaos in Ukraine. The Russians are going to see this as an opportunity to move and annex the peninsula of Crimea, which we see down here. Okay, so the Russians annex Crimea as the Ukraine goes through this political revolution. In 2021, we have the Russian ultimatum, which is almost the last step on our journey here. So in 2021, Western intelligence is going to spot a lot of Russian mobilization, right? They're moving their troops, and they were moving large portions of troops towards the border of Ukraine. The Russians, Putin, is going to say that this is just a training exercise and they haven't done anything wrong. But at the same time, they're going to give the Western world an ultimatum saying, you are not allowed to include Ukraine into NATO. You cannot move another step east, right? They've already broken this promise once. He's going to issue an ultimatum to make sure that they do not do it again. And that leads us into 2022 and the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this is a map of all of the major battle points going on right now. I'm not going to choose to get into the current event aspect of it because A, it's a super sensitive topic, and B, we're still uncovering a ton of information. My job right here was to give you guys a little history lesson on where we came from and how it all plays into the conflict that's unfolding right before our eyes. If you have any questions, let me know. I hope you guys are well. I hope that everyone's families are safe and that this all ends soon. So be well.